The ice in my crystal glass shifted, hitting the rim with a sharp clink that cut through the string quartet playing in the corner. Naperville in early spring carries a specific chill that seeps through country club windows no matter how high the heat is turned up. But the cold radiating toward me tonight was standing 2 feet away. Beverly wore a champagne silk dress that caught the chandelier light. It was perhaps 2 shades shy of bridal white, a deliberate choice for a guest at my cousin's evening wedding. She wanted to assert dominance over the room. She stepped into my personal space, bringing with her a heavy floral perfume that failed to mask the gin underneath. She pitched her voice to that distinct country club frequency, low enough to avoid a scene, but sharp enough to draw blood. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Camila," she said, gesturing vaguely with her cocktail napkin. "Though I suppose you always did lack shame." Around us, a few extended family members pretended not to watch. Their eyes darted over the rims of their wine glasses. Beverly soaked in the audience. She believed she had orchestrated a masterstroke. "I told David it would take time to heal," she continued, smiling a tight, practiced smile. "But driving you out of my son's house 4 months ago was the best decision I ever made. I saved him from a lifetime of being managed by a cold ledger of a woman. He is finally free." I did not grip my glass tighter. My pulse did not jump. As a supply chain analyst, my brain processes the world in terms of inputs, outputs, and bottlenecks. I look at a room and see logistics. Beverly, cornering me near the exit while her daughter Jessica stood lookout by the gift table, was a calculated ambush. I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds. I let her sit in the smug satisfaction she had draped over herself like that inappropriate dress. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The carbonation burned slightly on the way down, grounding me. I lowered the glass, met her gaze, and asked a single question. "Is that what you believe, Beverly?" The question was not defensive. It was an audit. And 5 minutes later, when the heavy oak doors of the ballroom opened and her son walked in holding my hand, she would realize her entire inventory was built on a lie. Welcome back to Pan of Vengeance, where we sit with the quiet moments families try to bury, then follow them all the way to the truth. I am Camila James. I am 32 years old. Drop your age in the comments so I know who I'm talking to today, and be sure to subscribe. I optimize global supply chains for a living. I track cargo across oceans and prevent bottlenecks before they happen. Naturally, I applied this competence to my marriage. My husband David teaches high school history. He is a good man who prefers to avoid conflict. So I handled the conflict. I managed the finances, the mortgage on our Oak Park home, and the grueling emotional labor required to handle Beverly and her endless demands. I tracked our lives in color-coded Excel sheets. I kept our vendor contracts and the sole copy of our premarital property deed locked in a pristine, fireproof safe in my home office. My competence kept the family peace. But here is the danger of keeping the peace so efficiently. Your labor becomes invisible. And once it becomes invisible, people start to think they can survive without you. They start to think the peace is free. Beverly thought she could run my logistics better than I could. She was about to find out exactly what happens when the supply chain cuts you off. 3 years before that wedding reception, my life ran on a predictable, highly optimized schedule. When you work in global supply chain logistics, you learn early that hope is not a business strategy. I track shipping containers from Shenzhen to Long Beach. I calculate the ripple effect of a dock worker strike in Rotterdam on a manufacturing plant in Peoria. My job is to foresee the bottleneck before the cargo even leaves the port. I isolate variables, I mitigate risk. I ensure the product reaches the destination on time and under budget. It is a career built on anticipating human error and engineering a system strong enough to withstand it. David operated on a different frequency. He teaches high school history. He spends his days analyzing events that concluded centuries ago. He is comfortable with the past because the outcomes are already written and the casualties are already buried. He is a good man. He is patient with his students and gentle with his words. but present tense conflict paralyzes him. If a student debates a grade, he can handle it with grace. If his mother calls during dinner to complain about a perceived slight, he freezes. Early in our relationship, I recognized this trait. I did not view it as a flaw. I viewed it as a variable. He brought warmth into my structured life, and in exchange, I absorbed the friction of his reality. We lived in a 3-bedroom Craftsman in Oak Park. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with mature elm trees that dropped golden leaves across the driveway every autumn. I purchased that house when I was 28. It was the culmination of early promotions, disciplined savings, and a refusal to carry consumer debt. I signed the closing papers alone. The deed listed my name and only my name. When David and I married, he moved his boxes into the guest room, which we converted into his grading study. He offered to contribute to the mortgage. I told him to handle the utilities and the groceries instead. The mortgage was an automated draft from my primary checking account. I liked the clean math of it. My home office sat at the end of the second-floor hallway. It was my command center. Tucked beneath the heavy mahogany desk was a pristine, commercial-grade, fireproof safe. I bought it the week I moved in. It required a 6-digit biometric passcode and the physical turn of a heavy steel latch that locked with a satisfying, deep thud. The weight of that latch engaging signaled undeniable security. Inside that dark, climate-controlled box rested my most critical professional documents: vendor contracts, non-disclosure agreements for overseas shipping conglomerates. And resting at the very bottom, inside a sealed plastic sleeve, was the original deed to the Oak Park house, a single sheet of paper proving ownership. I rarely thought about it. I just knew it was there, protected from fire, flood, and interference. I managed our shared life the way I managed international freight. My brain rests in the structured logic of rows and columns. I built a master workbook to track our household. The tabs were meticulously color-coded: mint green for fixed monthly expenses, slate blue for discretionary spending, yellow for joint savings, coral for upcoming property taxes, and a specific bright orange tab designated for his family. That orange tab required the most frequent updating. David came with attachments: his mother Beverly and his younger sister Jessica. Jessica was 29, chronically underemployed, and possessed a remarkable talent for treating other people's bank accounts as her personal rainy day fund. She jumped from graphic design courses to yoga retreats, always needing just a little help to cover her rent. Beverly enabled her. Beverly viewed her children not as independent adults, but as extensions of her own ego. She required constant management. She expected Sunday dinners hosted at our house, demanding specific cuts of meat and vintage wines. She would run a finger along the baseboards in the dining room, checking for dust, before taking her seat at the head of my table, a seat she claimed by default. David hated these dinners. He would spend Sunday afternoon pacing the kitchen, anxious about setting off his mother's temper. So I optimized the Sundays. I learned to steer the conversation away from Jessica's finances. I preemptively ordered the expensive wine. I absorbed Beverly's passive-aggressive comments about my demanding career with a polite nod. I played the gracious host so David could just sit and breathe. I became the shock absorber for the entire family. The emotional labor quickly bled into financial labor. When Jessica totaled her sedan and needed a down payment for a reliable used car, Beverly called David in tears. She claimed the stress was affecting her blood pressure. David hung up the phone pale and overwhelmed, rubbing his temples. He started calculating how many extra tutoring shifts he would need to pick up just to keep his mother from spiraling. I did not let him panic. I opened my laptop, clicked to the orange tab, and transferred the funds to Jessica's account. I categorized it as a one-time familial contribution. I told David we could afford it, and it would keep the peace. He looked at me like I had handed him a life raft. He kissed my forehead and thanked me for fixing it. I fixed everything. I scheduled the HVAC maintenance. I renewed David's vehicle registration. I ordered the floral arrangements for Beverly's garden club events when she inevitably forgot until the last minute. I paid the invoices and filed the receipts. I thought I was building a fortress around my marriage. I thought that by removing the friction, I was giving David the space to just be a husband. But there is a fatal flaw in building a frictionless environment for other people. They forget that friction exists. When a machine runs perfectly, the operator stops checking the engine. David stopped seeing the effort it took to deflect his mother's demands. Beverly stopped seeing me as a daughter-in-law and started seeing me as a concierge service. And Jessica simply saw an open tab. My competence, which began as a gift to my husband, morphed into a baseline expectation for his entire family. I made it too easy for them. By shielding David from the actual cost of his mother's demands, I denied him the opportunity to set his own boundaries. I paid for the peace, and in doing so, I taught Beverly that the peace was always for sale. She began to view my Oak Park house not as my property, but as an extension of her own territory. She decided that the boundaries I set were merely suggestions, obstacles she could bypass whenever she saw fit. And the easiest way to bypass a boundary is to walk right through the front door. All you need is the right piece of metal. The piece of metal in question was a standard brass Kwikset. It featured a chipped blue plastic rim around the bow. I added that blue rim myself to differentiate it from the primary sets. I handed that item to Jessica 3 years ago. The protocol was simple and logical. It was an emergency contingency. If the security system malfunctioned while we traveled, or if a pipe burst during a winter freeze and a contractor needed immediate access, Jessica lived 10 minutes closer than my own parents. It was a calculated risk. I trusted the protocol. I failed to account for human weakness. Jessica possessed a spine made of wet paper whenever her mother issued a demand. The blue-rimmed key migrated from Jessica's keychain to Beverly's purse within 6 months. I discovered the breach on a Tuesday in late October 2 years ago. I returned home from a grueling 12-hour shift. I had spent the entire afternoon untangling a logistics nightmare involving a delayed cargo ship in the Panama Canal and a missing customs manifest. My brain hummed with exhaustion. I crave order. Opening my front door usually provided that necessary reset. Instead, stepping into the foyer, the air inside my own home felt thick. It was altered. The sensory shift hit me before I even removed my wool coat. A dense, synthetic floral note hung in the hallway, mixed with a sharp undertone of gin and stale peppermint. Beverly. I walked into the kitchen. The space was not ransacked. It was repositioned. When you spend your life auditing inventory, your eyes catch micro discrepancies. The espresso machine sat 2 inches to the left. The linen dish towel was folded into a triangle instead of my standard square. I opened the refrigerator to pull out my weekly meal prep. The second shelf was empty. My food storage containers were missing. These were not disposable plastics. They were heavy-tempered borosilicate glass bowls with locking bamboo lids, an investment of $200 designed to keep ingredients fresh and organized for my unpredictable schedule. I checked the dishwasher. Empty. I checked the cabinets. I walked out to the alley behind the garage and opened the municipal recycling bin. There they were, 6 heavy glass containers, dumped unceremoniously among coffee grounds and junk mail. One lid had snapped in half. I did not call David. I called Beverly. She answered on the second ring, her tone bright and sharp, anticipating the fight. I asked her why my property was sitting in the alley. Her response was practiced. She told me she had dropped by to leave a casserole for David. She noticed my refrigerator looked cluttered. She decided to reorganize it. She declared the glass containers tacky and dangerous. They were too heavy, she claimed, and took up too much space. She informed me she had ordered a set of thin plastic tubs from a late-night infomercial to replace them. I told her she had no right to enter my home and throw away my belongings. The line went silent for a fraction of a second. That was when she deployed her favorite weapon. To understand Beverly, you must understand the architecture of her trauma. 25 years ago, her husband walked out. He drained their joint checking accounts, forged her signature on a second mortgage, and left her with a 10-year-old David, an 8-year-old Jessica, and a mountain of predatory debt. It is a harsh reality. Many women survive that kind of betrayal and build a resilient, independent new life. Beverly survived it by deciding she would never be vulnerable again. She achieved this by tethering her children to her financially and emotionally. If she owned her children's resources, no man could ever leave her destitute again. Maternal care mutated into a ledger where her offspring owed her a permanent, unpayable debt. David was not just her son. He was her retirement plan. He was her security. And by extension, my house was her house. Over the phone, her voice dropped the bright facade. It turned hard and flat. I was just taking care of my boy, Camila. You work all hours. Someone has to make sure his home is comfortable. I pressed the issue. I reminded her she used an emergency bypass for a non-emergency intrusion. Then she delivered the line, the mantra she would repeat for the next 2 years. A mother's access is never revoked. Her voice trembled, a calculated performance of old grief. When David's father left us with nothing, I vowed I would always have a home with my son. I sacrificed my entire youth to keep a roof over his head. You cannot lock me out of my own family. She hung up. When David came home an hour later, I laid out the facts. I presented the missing brass item. I presented the trashed containers. I detailed his mother's sense of entitlement to our physical space. I watched him absorb the information. His shoulders slumped. The color drained from his face, replaced by that familiar, paralyzing anxiety. He rubbed the back of his neck, refusing to meet my eyes. Cam, she is just trying to help. You know how she gets about her past. The divorce wrecked her. She gets triggered when she feels excluded. It is just food storage. I will buy you new ones tomorrow. The bamboo one's exactly the same. Please, let us just let it go. He looked at me with pleading eyes. He was asking me to swallow the intrusion so he would not have to confront the intruder. He was asking me to absorb the cost of his mother's trauma. I looked at my husband. I saw a man who would rather replace stolen goods than secure the perimeter against the thief. I agreed to let it go. I told him I would order the replacements myself. I did not raise my voice. I did not start a screaming match that would only end in him defending her broken past. But my analytical brain shifted gears. A physical boundary is the easiest line to spot. When someone walks through your front door and rearranges your kitchen, the violation is obvious. It leaves a scent. It leaves a footprint. However, if Beverly felt justified in bypassing a physical lock because she believed she owned a permanent stake in her son's life, what other protocols was she bypassing? If she felt entitled to the space inside my cabinets, what else did she feel entitled to? I stopped looking at the physical perimeter of my house. I started looking at the digital perimeter of our lives. The next morning, I poured a cup of black coffee and opened my laptop. I logged into our banking portal. I decided to run a routine audit on David's primary checking account. I did not expect to find anything major. I just wanted to verify our automated transfers for the month. Instead, I found a recurring sequence of numbers that did not match his standard payroll deposit. A piece of the supply chain was missing. The cargo was being diverted. And the destination coordinates pointed directly back to the woman who thought she owned the keys to everything. The glow of the laptop monitor cast a pale blue light across the surface of my mahogany desk. It was 2 a.m. The rest of the house sat wrapped in a heavy silence, broken only by the faint rhythmic ticking of the hallway clock and the occasional settling of old wood. I sat perfectly still, staring at the digital banking portal. When you spend your days analyzing global freight patterns, you develop an instinct for discrepancies. You learn how to spot a misrouted shipping container just by looking at a string of transit codes. A healthy supply chain flows with transparent, predictable rhythm. Our household finances were built on that same principle of transparency, or so I believed. I dragged my cursor down the list of recent transactions on David's primary checking account. My eyes caught a recurring outbound transfer, $600 processing on the 15th of every month. I traced the history backward. The first deduction occurred 3 months ago, shortly before the incident with the spare key. The transaction lacked a standard vendor label. It simply read as an external transfer to a regional credit union. David and I held our joint savings at a national bank. We held our mortgage with a separate institutional lender. We had zero legitimate financial ties to this specific credit union. I pulled the routing numbers and cross-referenced them with our approved vendor list in my color-coded workbook. Nothing matched. I dug deeper into the digital footprint, pulling the destination account details. The system required a moment to authenticate. When the text finally rendered on the screen, the truth materialized in stark black letters. It was a secondary checking account. The primary account holder was David James. The secondary account holder was Beverly James. My husband had opened a secret joint account with his mother and was funneling a portion of his monthly income directly into her hands. I did not slam the laptop shut. I did not storm down the hall to wake him. Confrontation fueled by midnight adrenaline is a tactical error. It allows the offending party to dismiss your valid grievances as mere emotional hysteria. I prefer to operate from a position of undeniable fact. I spent the next 20 minutes pulling the statements, verifying the dates, and confirming the total diverted sum. $1,800 missing over 3 months. The cargo had been hijacked from our shared inventory. I waited until morning. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. I stood by the island, nursing a ceramic mug of black coffee. The bitter warmth grounded my thoughts. Upstairs, the shower shut off. 10 minutes later, David walked into the kitchen, adjusting the cuffs of his work shirt. He smiled an easy, relaxed expression and reached for the coffee pot. I placed a single printed page on the granite countertop. I slid it toward him. "Can you explain this line item, David?" I kept my voice level. It was the same tone I used when asking a port authority why a shipment was detained. He glanced down. His hand froze inches from the carafe. I watched his body language shift in real time. His shoulders tightened. The easy smile vanished, replaced by a tight, thin line. A flush of heat crept up his neck, staining his collar line red. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. These were the physical markers of a man whose hidden compartments had just been exposed to the light. "It is for my mother," he said. His voice lacked its usual resonance. I waited. I let the silence do the work. Silence is a vacuum, and people will rush to fill it to alleviate their own discomfort. "She had a medical emergency," he continued, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "A specialist consultation. Her insurance denied the claim. The billing department threatened to send the balance to collections. She was terrified, Camila. She called me crying. I had to help her set up a payment plan." I looked at the printed statement. Why use a secret joint account? Why not bring the invoice to me so we could allocate the funds from the orange tab in our budget? David rubbed the back of his neck, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked out the window, staring at the elm trees. "She made me promise not to tell you." I set my ceramic mug down. The resulting clink echoed in the quiet kitchen. "She made you promise to hide financial liabilities from your wife? Explain her reasoning." He sighed, a long, defeated sound. "She said you would not understand. She said you view everything through a ledger. You measure every favor in dollars and cents. She told me you were too greedy to understand real family loyalty, and if I asked you for the money, you would just hold it over her head. I just wanted to fix it without causing a war between the two of you." I absorbed his words. The sting did not come from the diverted funds. The sting came from his complicity in her narrative. Beverly had manufactured a crisis, labeled me the villain, and convinced my husband to act as her accomplice. She projected her own defining trait onto me. The woman who treated her children as walking retirement plans dared to call me greedy. "You chose to believe her assessment of my character," I stated. "You chose to protect her pride rather than honor our financial partnership." "I was just trying to keep the peace," he pleaded, finally looking at me. His eyes held a desperate, hollow apology. "You did not keep the peace, David. You subsidized a lie." I picked up my coffee, turned my back on him, and walked upstairs to my office. He did not follow me. He never followed me when the conversation required a spine. I sat at my mahogany desk and woke my computer. I executed a command to print the last 3 months of his banking history. The laser printer whirred to life in the corner of the room. The mechanical hum filled the space, a steady, predictable rhythm. I listened to the paper feeding through the rollers. The scent of warm ozone and fresh toner drifted into the air. I took the warm pages from the output tray and laid them flat on my desk. I pulled a bright yellow highlighter from my acrylic organizer. I uncapped it and drew a thick, precise line across each $600 deduction. The neon ink soaked into the matte paper fibers, turning a hidden betrayal into a glowing, undeniable record. I did not shed a tear. Crying is an inefficient response to a systemic failure. Instead, my analytical brain compartmentalized the injury and began mapping the opponent's strategy. Beverly was not merely extracting resources, she was actively driving a wedge into the foundation of my marriage. She was testing the structural integrity of David's loyalty, proving to herself that she could command him to deceive me. She was waging a psychological campaign. The hidden bank account was just the logistics wing of her operation. The real threat was the propaganda. She had convinced my husband that I was a cold, calculating miser who lacked empathy. If she could manipulate him into believing that falsehood, she could manipulate the rest of the family into believing much worse. I opened the heavy steel drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh manila folder. I placed the highlighted statements inside. I labeled the tab in clear block lettering. I locked the folder away. I realized then that the battlefield was expanding. If Beverly felt bold enough to attack my character regarding our finances, she would soon target my time. I worked demanding hours. I spent late nights at the corporate office coordinating international freight schedules. I provided the income that kept her son comfortable. But to a woman desperate to paint me as the villain, those long hours at the office were about to become the perfect raw material for her next fabrication. The Whisper campaign was already being drafted. The logistics of a lie require constant maintenance. When a vendor attempts to cover up a missed shipment, they fabricate excuses. Weather delays, customs holds, unexpected mechanical failures. The lie builds a fragile scaffolding. If you press hard enough on a single joint, the entire structure collapses. Beverly was currently building a very elaborate scaffolding, and she chose my career as the foundation. My schedule during the fourth quarter was brutal. Retail supply chains peak in the weeks preceding the holidays, demanding constant oversight to manage the influx of overseas freight. I often returned to the Oak Park house well after 8 in the evening. David understood this rhythm. He had lived with it for 3 years. But understanding is a vulnerable commodity when someone is actively working to erode it. Beverly recognized the opportunity. She could not attack my financial contributions directly without exposing her own hidden account, so she attacked my character. She began a subtle whisper campaign within the extended family, utilizing Jessica as her primary distributor. It started with seemingly innocuous comments at Sunday dinners. Jessica would sigh, stirring her iced tea, and murmur how lonely David must be with me working such extreme hours. Beverly would chime in, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, suggesting it was unnatural for a newly married woman to spend so much time at the office, surrounded by male executives. The subtext was clear. It was a calculated drip feed of poison, designed to make David question the empty space in his home. The escalation arrived on a Thursday evening in early November. I had spent the day at a regional distribution center in Joliet, untangling a routing error that had stalled 12 pallets of consumer electronics. I drove straight from the warehouse to the corporate office, arriving at 6 to finalize the reporting. I finally pulled into our driveway shortly before 10. I unlocked the front door and dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl on the console table. The house was dark, save for the single lamp illuminated in the living room. David sat in the leather armchair staring at the unlit fireplace. He did not look up when I walked in. He did not offer his usual greeting. The air in the room felt dense, heavy with an unexpressed accusation. I unbuttoned my coat. "Is everything all right, David?" He finally turned his head. His expression was unrecognizable. The familiar, anxious peacemaker had vanished. In his place sat a man hollowed out by suspicion. He held up a small square envelope. The paper was stiff-textured, the kind of cheap stationery sold in multi-packs at discount pharmacies. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a soft, final thud. "I found that on the passenger seat of your car this morning," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection. "I moved your car to reach the lawnmower. It was tucked between the seat and the center console. I walked over and picked up the envelope. It was unsealed. I slid the card out. The front featured a generic watercolor sunset. I opened it. Inside, written in a forced, slanted cursive that attempted to look masculine but failed, was a brief message. "Late nights are the best part of the job. Can't wait for the next one. J." I stared at the cheap ink. The cursive was inconsistent, the loops of the letters cramped and deliberate. It was the handwriting of someone trying to disguise their natural script. It was the handwriting of someone who had recently asked me for a down payment on a reliable used car. Jessica. She had access to my car during the family barbecue the previous weekend, supposedly searching for her lost sunglasses. I looked back at David. "You believe this is real." He stood up, running a hand through his hair. The anger finally broke through the flat exterior. "What am I supposed to believe, Camila? You work 80-hour weeks. You are constantly on your phone. My mother has been telling me for a month that you seem distant, that no one works that late unless they have a reason to stay away from home. I defended you. I told her she was crazy. And then I find this." The red herring was beautifully executed. Beverly had primed him with the narrative, and Jessica had planted the physical evidence. They understood that David's greatest weakness was his fear of abandonment. They weaponized that fear against me. For the next 24 hours, my marriage ceased to function. David slept in the guest room. He left for school before I woke, and he returned after I had already left for the office. He communicated only through terse text messages regarding household logistics. The silence was absolute. It was the cold, sterile silence of a contract being voided. He truly believed I had compromised our partnership. Many individuals would have reacted to this accusation with tears, frantic denials, and emotional pleas. I do not engage in emotional pleas. I engage in data collection. On Friday morning, I drove to the corporate office. I bypassed my desk and walked directly to the security management suite on the ground floor. The building utilizes a comprehensive RFID access control system. Every entry, every exit, every internal door swipe is logged in a centralized database. I requested a meeting with the head of security, a former Marine named Vance, who appreciated my direct communication style. I asked him for a complete, time-stamped export of my keycard activity for the past 90 days. Furthermore, I requested the corresponding surveillance stills from the parking garage for my vehicle's entry and exit times. Vance raised an eyebrow, but complied. Within 2 hours, I possessed a sealed corporate envelope containing 40 pages of undeniable digital truth. I returned to the Oak Park house that evening. David was in the kitchen aggressively scrubbing a pan that was already clean. The tension radiated off him in waves. I set the sealed envelope on the granite island right next to the cheap watercolor greeting card he had left sitting there. I poured myself a glass of water, taking a slow sip. "You demanded an explanation for my hours, David. The documentation is inside that envelope." He stopped scrubbing. He wiped his hands on a towel, staring at the thick packet as if it might explode. He hesitated, his jaw tight. He reached out and broke the seal. He began flipping through the pages. The columns were clear: date, time, location, employee ID. He saw the swipes for the main entrance at 7 in the morning. He saw the swipes for the elevator banks. He saw the final exit swipes. "Look at the timestamp for last Thursday," I instructed, my tone even. "The night before you found that card, the night I was supposedly engaged in a clandestine meeting." He traced his finger down the page. The final log entry for that date read, "Main lobby exit, 9:42 p.m. Attached behind that page was a grainy black and white security still of my sedan exiting the parking garage gate. The timestamp on the image matched exactly, 9:42. "It takes 45 minutes to drive from the corporate office to this house," I stated. I walked through the front door at 10:30. My location is accounted for down to the minute. I have provided 90 days of consecutive data proving my exact whereabouts. He stared at the spreadsheet. The anger in his posture began to dissolve, replaced by a creeping, sickening realization. He looked from the security logs to the cheap greeting card, comparing the hard data of a corporate tracking system against the flimsy, manufactured evidence of a generic sunset. If I am working until 9:42 at night, I continued, my voice dropping lower, who has the time, the access, and the motive to plant a fake note in my vehicle? Who was alone in my car last Sunday claiming to look for lost sunglasses? The color drained from his face. Jessica, he whispered. I did not confirm it. I did not need to. The data spoke for itself. Your mother and your sister fabricated an affair to destroy your trust in me. They exploited your insecurities because they knew you would react emotionally instead of analytically. They wanted to isolate you. They wanted to prove that my long hours were a liability rather than the resource that funds your mother's secret bank account. He collapsed onto one of the bar stools, burying his face in his hands. The sound he made was a quiet, ragged exhale. I am sorry, he said, his voice muffled. I am so sorry. I let them get in my head. I should have known. You should have audited the source I corrected. You accepted a defective shipment without checking the manifest. The fracture in his trust was momentarily healed, replaced by a profound shame. He finally saw the scaffolding his mother was building, but the realization came too late to stop the next phase of her operation. Beverly had failed to destroy my marriage in private. She realized that subtle manipulation and planted notes were insufficient to break my hold on her son. If she wanted to remove me from the equation, she needed a larger stage. She needed an audience. She needed to force a public confrontation that I could not simply solve with a spreadsheet. The holidays were approaching. The entire extended family would be gathering. Beverly saw her opportunity to execute a highly visible, undeniable humiliation. She was preparing to set the table for a war, and she intended to leave me without a chair. Late autumn in Illinois delivers a distinct, unforgiving chill. The weather does not ease into winter. The temperature drops sharply, bringing a biting wind that strips the remaining leaves from the trees and turns the sky a flat, bruised gray. I observed this bleak landscape through the passenger window of our sedan. We were driving to Beverly's house for the annual holiday gathering. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the security log incident. 3 weeks since David realized his mother and sister had manufactured a fictitious affair to orchestrate our divorce. He gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. He had spent the last 21 days paralyzed by guilt and indecision. Confronting his mother meant dismantling the foundation of his entire worldview. He requested more time to process the betrayal. He pleaded with me to attend the holiday dinner, promising he would handle her if she overstepped. I agreed to accompany him. I did not agree out of a desire for familial harmony. I agreed because a supply chain analyst always observes a failing system firsthand before initiating a total recall. I needed to see exactly how far Beverly would push her agenda when she possessed a captive audience. Beverly resided in a sprawling, outdated colonial in the western suburbs. We parked along the curb, tires crunching over fallen foliage. The driveway was already packed with vehicles belonging to various aunts, uncles, and cousins. David turned off the ignition, exhaled a shaky breath, and reached for my hand. I let him hold it for a brief second before reaching for my purse. I offered no verbal reassurance. Reassurance must be earned through action. We navigated the concrete walkway and pushed through the front door. The interior air hit me instantly. It was a dense mixture of roasted poultry burning sage and the inevitable sharp undertone of gin. The foyer hummed with the loud, overlapping conversations of extended relatives. Beverly held court near the living room fireplace, wearing an emerald green blouse and holding a crystal wine glass. She spotted us immediately. Her eyes locked onto mine, tracking my movements with the predatory focus of a hawk spotting a field mouse. She offered a tight, artificial smile to David and turned her back to me. The objective was clear. I was to be ignored. I handed my wool trench coat to a passing cousin and surveyed the operational layout. The dining room sat adjacent to the kitchen, visible through a wide archway. Beverly had expanded her antique mahogany table to its maximum length, inserting 2 heavy wooden leaves to accommodate the crowd. A crisp white linen cloth draped over the surface, set with her pristine gold-rimmed china and heavy silver cutlery. I stepped closer to the archway, my eyes automatically running a logistical inventory. I counted the intricately folded cloth napkins standing upright on the plates. 14 place settings. I turned my head and counted the adults and teenagers currently occupying the living room and kitchen. Including David and myself, there were 15 people present. A mathematical deficit in a planned event is rarely an accident. It is a calculated resource allocation. Beverly had intentionally set the table with 1 less chair. I leaned against the doorframe and waited for the execution of her strategy. 30 minutes later, Beverly clapped her hands, her voice ringing out over the ambient noise. She announced that dinner was served. The relatives moved in a herd, migrating toward the dining room. Beverly stood at the head of the table, acting as the traffic director. She guided her siblings to their designated spots. She ushered Jessica into a seat near the center. She pointed David toward the chair immediately to her right. I remained near the archway as the remaining guests claimed the open spaces. Within moments, every wooden chair was occupied. I stood alone on the hardwood floor, holding a glass of water, lacking a designated location. Beverly placed a hand over her heart, feigning a sudden dramatic realization. She widened her eyes and offered a patronizing gasp. "Goodness," she announced, her voice projecting loud enough for the entire room to hear. "It appears we are short a seat. My counting must be slipping in my old age. Camila, you can just grab one of the metal stools from the kitchen island and squeeze in at the corner. I am sure you do not mind." The room fell silent. Every head turned in my direction. The aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably in their seats, staring down at their empty china plates. They recognized the slight. They recognized the hostility. They also recognized that intervening would draw Beverly's wrath toward them. Silence is the currency of enablers. I looked at David. He sat frozen in his chair to his mother's right. He held the heavy silver carving knife in his right hand, positioned beside the large, steaming turkey resting on a platter. His face paled. He looked at the empty space at the corner of the table, then up at me. He opened his mouth, but his vocal cords failed to produce a sound. The peacemaker was paralyzed by the war. I did not retrieve the metal stool. I did not force myself into a corner where I was unwanted. I remained standing. I watched David carve the bird in a tense, agonizing silence. The only sound in the room was the scrape of metal against bone and the quiet passing of side dishes. Beverly waited until the plates were full. She picked up her crystal glass and tapped her spoon against the rim. The sharp, ringing sound commanded immediate attention. She stood up, smoothing the front of her emerald blouse. She raised her glass, her gaze sweeping over her captive audience, before settling heavily on her son. "Family is the most precious resource we possess," she began, her tone dripping with rehearsed sentimentality. "This past year has brought unexpected challenges. We have watched those we love struggle under the weight of cold, transactional arrangements disguised as partnerships. We have watched our own blood be isolated and managed by controlling influences." She paused, letting the acidic words soak into the room. She shifted her gaze from David directly to me. I maintained eye contact, my face a neutral mask. "But a new season is approaching," she continued, her voice rising in triumphant crescendo. "We are all so profoundly relieved that a necessary transition is underway. To my wonderful son, may you enjoy your imminent freedom. To casting off the chains that bind you. To a future where you are finally liberated." She raised the glass higher. Cheers. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single relative raised their glass. Not a single person echoed the cheer. The forks remained motionless on the table. The air pressure in the room plummeted. Beverly stood at the head of the table, her arm extended, offering a toast to my impending divorce, while I stood 10 feet away. I looked at my husband. He sat staring at the half-carved turkey. The silver knife remained clenched in his fist. He did not stand up. He did not reprimand his mother. He did not defend his marriage. He simply absorbed the public execution of our relationship and stared at the roasted poultry. I required no further data. The audit was complete. I set my water glass down on a nearby side table. I did not shout. I did not throw a tantrum. A professional does not argue with a hostile vendor. They terminate the contract. I turned my back on the dining room. I navigated the hallway, moving with calm, deliberate strides. I located the hall closet, retrieved my wool trench coat, and slipped my arms into the sleeves. I buttoned the front, secured the belt, and reached for the front doorknob. I stepped out into the harsh Illinois evening. The biting November wind whipped across the lawn, stinging my cheeks and bringing an immediate sharp clarity to my senses. I walked down the concrete path and stepped onto the driveway. The gravel crunched loudly beneath the soles of my leather boots, a steady, rhythmic sound cutting through the cold air. The front door burst open behind me. Heavy footsteps pounded across the porch. "Camila, wait!" I stopped near the driver's side door of my vehicle. I turned around. David stood at the edge of the driveway, shivering in his thin dress shirt. The wind whipped his hair across his forehead. His chest heaved as he struggled to process the disaster he had just permitted. "I did not know she was going to say that," he stammered, his voice frantic, pleading. "I swear to you, I thought we were just coming for dinner. Please do not leave. Come back inside. I will talk to her." I pulled my car keys from my pocket. "You held the carving knife and said nothing," I stated. "Your mother dissolved our marriage in front of an audience, and you stared at a plate of food. I will not stand in a room where I am not granted a chair. I will not participate in a system that requires my humiliation to function." He took a step forward, reaching out a hand. "Camila, please." I opened the car door. The interior light illuminated the dark driveway. "Do not follow me home tonight, David." I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, severing the conversation. I started the engine. As I shifted the vehicle into reverse, I looked up, past my husband, toward the large picture window of the dining room. Beverly stood behind the glass. She held her crystal wine goblet, watching my taillights illuminate the driveway. A wide, smug smile stretched across her face. She believed she had executed a flawless strategy. She assumed the physical separation marked her ultimate victory. She thought she had won the war. She had no idea the fracture she just caused was about to become the foundation of her own ruin. The drive back to Oak Park provided a necessary vacuum. Silence allows the mind to organize raw data into an actionable sequence. I did not shed tears during the 45-minute commute. Grief is a secondary emotion. It arrives only after the initial threat is neutralized. Right now, I was operating in threat assessment mode. A systemic failure had occurred at the Thanksgiving table, and the root cause was sitting in my passenger seat for the last 3 years, pretending not to see the decay. I entered the dark house, disarmed the security panel, and walked straight to the kitchen. I engaged the coffee maker, listening to the water heat and filter through the dark roast grounds. I carried my ceramic mug upstairs to the home office. I unlocked the heavy mahogany desk drawer and retrieved the manila folder, the dossier. Inside lay the highlighted bank statements detailing the diverted funds. Behind those sat the security logs, proving my whereabouts during the fabricated affair, paired with the cheap watercolor greeting card Jessica had planted. I added a new sheet of paper, drafting a timeline of Beverly's escalating hostility, culminating in the missing chair at her dining table. I brought the folder downstairs and placed it squarely in the center of the granite kitchen island. I poured a second cup of coffee and set it opposite mine. Then I waited. David arrived 3 hours later. The green digital numerals on the oven display read 1 in the morning. I heard his key slide into the front lock, the sound lacking its usual brisk efficiency. The door opened and closed with a slow, defeated click. He stepped into the kitchen archway and stopped. His appearance mirrored a man who had just survived a physical altercation. His tie hung loose, the knot pulled halfway down his chest. The collar of his dress shirt was unbuttoned. His posture, usually upright and even, sagged under an invisible weight. He smelled of the biting winter wind and the faint, lingering scent of roasted sage. He looked at the granite island, registering the 2 mugs and the thick folder resting between them. He assumed he was looking at the dissolution of our marriage. He believed the manila envelope contained legal filings. I did not speak. I sat on the bar stool, my hands wrapped around my mug, and watched him process the scene. Without the buffer of my presence, David had spent the last 3 hours exposed to the unfiltered reality of his family. He had watched them celebrate my departure. He had witnessed the ease with which his mother erased his wife from the narrative. The blinders were gone. He walked toward the island, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. He sank onto the stool opposite me, staring at the folder. "I know what this is," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I will sign whatever you need me to sign. I do not blame you, Camila. I failed to protect you." I sat there and let her dismantle us in front of everyone. I slid the folder 2 inches forward. "Open it, David." He hesitated, bracing himself for legal jargon and the division of assets. He reached out his fingers, trembling slightly, and flipped the heavy cover open. He did not find a divorce petition. He found the architecture of a siege. His eyes scanned the top page, the timeline. He read the documented dates of the spare key intrusion, the unauthorized joint account transfers, the planted greeting card, and the Thanksgiving ambush. He turned the page. He saw the highlighted bank records, the glowing yellow ink marking every $600 deduction his mother had extracted under the guise of medical debt. He turned another page, the corporate security swipe logs and the fake sunset note. I watched his breathing turn shallow. The color drained from his face, replaced by a sickly pale hue. He was reading the precise methodology of his own manipulation. He was looking at the ledgers of a woman who viewed him not as a son, but as an asset to be managed and a weapon to be aimed. A single tear escaped his eye. It fell, landing with a soft tap against the thick manila paper darkening the edge of the folder. He did not wipe it away. "She engineered the entire fracture," I stated, my tone even devoid of malice. "She created a fictitious financial crisis to test your willingness to hide resources from me. She orchestrated a fake affair to isolate you emotionally. Tonight, she executed a public humiliation to force my exit. Your mother does not want a relationship with you. She wants a monopoly on you." David dragged his hands down his face. The peacemaker died in that gesture. When he looked up, the anxiety that usually clouded his features had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hardened clarity. "I was a pawn," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "She played me. She used my guilt over my father leaving to make me betray my own wife. She wanted to break this marriage just to prove she owned the pieces." "Yes," I agreed. "She assumes she has succeeded. She thinks the board is cleared." He looked at the 2 cups of black coffee resting on the granite. They had been sitting there for an hour. The steam had vanished. The liquid inside was turning cold, reflecting the overhead pendant lights in the dark room. "If we file for divorce, she wins," he said, his jaw tightening. "She gets exactly what she planned." "A conventional retreat is unacceptable," I replied. "But a tactical retreat offers advantages. When an adversary believes they have achieved victory, they become complacent. They lower their defenses. They make mistakes." He studied my face, recognizing the shift in my posture. The supply chain analyst was drawing up a new manifest. "What are you proposing, Cam?" I placed my hand flat on the granite island. "We give her the victory she desires. We give her the separation. I will pack my bags and move into a temporary apartment downtown. You will remain in this house and play the role of the depressed, compliant son. We will let her believe she has driven me away." David frowned, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Why would we give her the satisfaction?" "Because her current operation is small," I explained. "She is siphoning minor funds and planting petty notes. A parasite rarely stops at the surface when the host stops fighting. If we remove the barrier, if we let her believe she has unchecked access to your life, she will reach for a larger prize. She will escalate. And when she escalates, she will leave a trail of prosecutable evidence. We let her hang herself, he murmured, the realization taking root. We give her enough rope. Precisely. We execute a covert alliance. We meet in secret. We audit her moves. We gather the data. And we wait for her to cross a line she cannot uncross. David looked down at the dark, cold coffee. He looked at the tear-stained manila folder. Then he reached across the island and covered my hand with his. The grip was firm, resolute, lacking any trace of his former hesitation. "Tell me the logistics," he said. The fracture she caused was no longer a vulnerability. It was our cover story. We spent the next 2 hours mapping the parameters of our fake separation. We established the communication protocols. We decided I would lease a one-bedroom apartment near the corporate office to serve as my base of operations. David would stay behind, maintaining the illusion of a broken man mourning the end of his marriage. He agreed to accept every phone call his mother made. He agreed to let her back into the Oak Park house. He would become the perfect, agreeable target. Meanwhile, I would monitor every digital footprint from afar. I would track the bank accounts, the credit inquiries, and the property records. When the sun finally began to rise over the elm trees outside our kitchen window, the plan was locked in place. The husband who once feared confronting his mother had transformed into an active operative in her downfall. Beverly thought she had severed my supply chain. She did not realize I was merely rerouting the freight, and the new destination was going to cost her everything. Executing a strategic withdrawal requires as much precision as launching an offensive. The Monday following the holiday dinner, I procured a 6-month lease on a unit inside a sprawling gray concrete complex near the industrial corridor. The architecture was strictly utilitarian. The square footage was minimal. It featured cracked linoleum flooring and radiators that hissed unevenly throughout the night. It was the exact aesthetic necessary to sell the narrative of a defeated, displaced spouse. I packed 3 suitcases of seasonal clothing, a box of essential files, and my laptop. I left the heavy furniture. I left the curated artwork. Most importantly, I left the locked, fireproof safe securely bolted beneath my mahogany desk. David played his role with a natural talent born from decades of surviving his mother's emotional turbulence. He texted Beverly on Tuesday morning, delivering the scripted lines. He told her I had walked out. He told her he felt lost. The bait was cast into the water. The predator struck before the ripples could even fade. By Thursday afternoon, a silver crossover SUV parked in the driveway of my Oak Park house. Beverly did not arrive with a simple overnight bag to offer maternal comfort. She arrived with 3 oversized hard-shell rolling suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes filled with her preferred kitchen utensils. She intended to occupy the territory. I monitored her arrival through the exterior security cameras linked to my smartphone. I watched the live feed from the confines of my cramped new living area. Beverly marched up the concrete walkway, directing Jessica to carry the heavier luggage. They bypassed the guest quarters entirely. Beverly instructed her daughter to haul the suitcases straight up the main staircase, depositing them directly into the primary suite, my bedroom. She staked her claim on the center of the household. The hostile takeover was sensory as well as physical. David reported the environmental shifts during our encrypted check-ins. Beverly immediately began roasting heavy cuts of meat. The rich, dense odor of braised beef and cooked carrots permeated the drywall, clinging to the curtains and the upholstery. She was attempting to overwrite the olfactory baseline of the environment. She wanted to erase any lingering trace of my existence, replacing my preference for citrus and fresh air with the suffocating weight of her pot roast. Once she established her physical beachhead, she initiated the propaganda phase. Beverly possessed a robust network of gossiping acquaintances. She spent her afternoons pacing the hardwood floors of my living room, her voice carrying through the quiet house while David graded papers in the den. She broadcasted her triumph over the telephone line. She painted a vivid, tragic picture of her poor, heartbroken boy, rescued just in time from the clutches of a frigid careerist. She spoke of my new living arrangements with gleeful disdain. She described my utilitarian apartment as a dreary, pathetic little box, a fitting punishment for a woman who refused to prioritize family. She basked in the validation of her peers. She believed she had outmaneuvered a corporate analyst. She believed she had reclaimed her primary asset. She remained entirely ignorant of the shadows operating just beyond her peripheral vision. The reality of my marriage existed far away from the scent of braised beef. David and I established a secure communication protocol. He purchased a prepaid, untraceable cellular device using physical currency at a convenience store 2 towns over. He kept this secondary phone powered down and hidden inside the spare tire compartment of his sedan, only accessing it during his commute or while locked inside his classroom. We orchestrated covert rendezvous twice a week. We selected locations devoid of any familial overlap. Level 4 of a dimly lit municipal parking structure near the hospital district. A corner booth at an independent cash-only coffee roaster on the opposite side of the county. These meetings were brief, tactical, and profoundly intimate. I would sit in the passenger seat of his car, the engine idling to generate heat against the December chill. He would hand me a manila envelope containing the week's intelligence. Discarded mail, overheard conversations, printed bank statements he intercepted before his mother could review them. In return, I provided the analytical breakdown. I mapped her movements. The artificial separation achieved something years of therapy could never accomplish. It forged us into a unified front. Stripped of the daily friction of managing his family's demands, David finally viewed our partnership through a clear lens. He saw the precision of my logic not as coldness, but as a protective shield. He kissed me in those concrete parking garages with a fierce, desperate loyalty. The woman broadcasting her victory from my stolen dining room had inadvertently catalyzed the strongest phase of our relationship. Our discipline remained unwavering. I spent my evenings in the cold linoleum-tiled apartment, sitting cross-legged on a cheap mattress, parsing the data. David spent his nights sleeping on an air mattress in his grading study, allowing his mother to reign supreme over the primary suite. He perfected the posture of a grieving husband. He let his shoulders slump. He spoke in low, monotone syllables. He allowed Beverly to dictate the grocery list and control the television remote. He made himself small, creating a vacuum of authority. And Beverly, true to her nature, rushed to fill that void. A conqueror rarely remains satisfied with mere occupation. Once the territory is secured, the extraction of resources must begin. She grew comfortable walking across my floors. She grew comfortable sleeping under my roof. That comfort bred a dangerous, intoxicating arrogance. She stopped viewing David as a son experiencing a painful transition. She began viewing him as a blank slate, an entity she could reshape and leverage for her own financial gain. The minor diversions of $600 a month no longer satisfied her appetite. The medical debt narrative had served its purpose, but her ambitions required a larger capital injection. During week 5 of the operation, David delivered a crucial piece of intelligence during our coffee shop rendezvous. He slid a crumpled piece of loose-leaf paper across the scarred wooden table. It contained a list of sensitive data points his mother had casually requested earlier that morning: his Social Security number, his mother's maiden name, his estimated annual gross income. She claimed she wanted to help him consolidate his student loans to ease his financial burden during the divorce process. I stared at the handwritten list, the cheap coffee turning cold in my paper cup. You do not need a grown man's Social Security number to discuss loan consolidation. You need those specific identifiers to establish new lines of credit. The parasite had finished feeding on the surface. She was preparing to tap the main artery. The shadow audit was officially active. The hissing radiator in my temporary apartment provided a steady background hum as I stared at the crumpled paper David had given me. A Social Security number is a master key. When an adversary asks for your master key under the guise of maternal assistance, you do not simply decline. You set a trap. I opened my laptop and initiated a comprehensive lockdown on David's credit profile. I routed all security alerts, verification codes, and inquiry notifications directly to a secure encrypted email address on my private server. I bypassed the Oak Park address entirely. Beverly thought she was operating in the shadows. I was illuminating the entire grid. Before addressing her future crimes, I needed to categorize her past offenses. I returned my attention to the Regional Credit Union, the destination of the initial diverted funds. The narrative of a crushing medical debt never aligned with Beverly's pristine vanity. Using public business registries and a basic trace on the routing data, I pulled the corporate entity attached to that account. It was not a hospital billing department. It was a regional distribution hub for a company called Vitality Core Solutions. The pieces of the puzzle snapped into a sharp, pathetic picture. Vitality Core Solutions was a multi-level marketing scheme that peddled overpriced dietary supplements and essential oils to suburban housewives promising financial independence. Beverly projected an image of affluent grace. She hosted luncheons and curated vintage wine selections. Admitting financial distress was unacceptable. Falling for a pyramid scheme was a social death sentence. Jessica, perpetually searching for a shortcut to success, had undoubtedly recruited her mother. They purchased wholesale tier status, flooding their inventory to maintain the illusion of profitability. David confirmed this theory during our next clandestine meeting. We sat in his idling sedan on the top floor of a municipal parking garage. He recalled noticing dozens of identical, unopened cardboard boxes stacked floor to ceiling in Jessica's detached garage. The containers were labeled with the Vitality Core logo. The fabricated medical emergency was a desperate, panicked attempt to cover their minimum monthly purchasing quotas. They stole from my household to fund a garage full of expiring vitamins. Discovering the failed business venture offered a profound sense of clarity, but it lacked the legal weight necessary for a federal indictment. Misappropriating joint funds is a civil dispute. I required Beverly to cross the threshold into criminal territory. I needed her to commit a felony on paper. She obliged my timeline less than 48 hours later. My secure email chimed late on a Wednesday evening. The notification glowed against the dark room. A financial institution was running a hard inquiry on David's credit file. Someone was attempting to open a high-yield rewards card utilizing his personal credentials. The application was submitted through an online portal. Because I held the primary administrative rights to his credit monitoring service, I accessed the back-end security details. The submission originated from a specific Internet protocol address. I cross-referenced the digital footprint with our home network logs. The numbers matched the broadband router installed in my Oak Park living room. The parasite was actively feeding. Opening a line of credit requires more than digital keystrokes. The bank required physical signatures to finalize the secondary account authorizations. Beverly needed David to sign the paperwork. She presented the documents to him the following evening after dinner. According to David, she slid a sleek pen across the dining table with a warm, encouraging smile. She framed the contracts as routine debt consolidation transfers, promising they would lower his monthly burdens. Before our strategic separation, David would have signed the pages blindly to avoid her disappointment. He would have chosen the path of least resistance. The new David picked up the pen, examined the dense legal text, and set the ink down on the tablecloth. He executed our countermeasure with flawless precision. He adopted a tone of weary, defeated compliance. He informed her that his new legal counsel mandated a strict review of all financial modifications during the divorce proceedings. He claimed his ruthless attorney threatened to freeze his assets if he signed unsanctioned contracts. Beverly's maternal smile fractured. She argued. She accused him of letting a stranger dictate his life. She attempted to leverage her guilt, reminding him of her sacrifices. David merely shrugged, playing the helpless victim of a predatory legal system. He tucked the unexecuted paperwork into his leather briefcase, promising to have his lawyer expedite the review. He walked away, leaving her fuming in the dining room. The following afternoon, David handed me those physical documents in the concrete stairwell of a public library. The air smelled of old paper and dust. I slid the contracts into my briefcase. I did not rely solely on my own expertise to process the data. Supply chain analysts map logistics. Forensic accountants build prosecutable cases. I retained a specialist. Her name was Sarah. She operated a boutique firm downtown specializing in hidden asset recovery and marital fraud. I sat across from her polished glass desk and handed her the complete dossier. I provided the routing numbers linked to the dietary supplements. I supplied the access logs from the fraudulent credit inquiries. I laid the unexecuted contracts Beverly had printed on the glass surface. I instructed Sarah to construct a watertight evidentiary chain. I wanted every digital fingerprint documented, notarized, and prepared for a court of law. Sarah reviewed the paperwork. Her expression remained neutral, the mark of a professional who had seen every variation of human greed. She assured me the trail was remarkably clear. Beverly operated with the careless arrogance of a thief who believes the victim is blind. Sarah promised a certified bound report within 2 weeks. The forensic accountant required time to finalize the exhibits. During that window of silence, Beverly grew increasingly restless. The stalled credit applications frustrated her anticipated cash flow. The unsold supplements deteriorating in Jessica's garage represented a heavy sunk cost. She needed liquid capital to maintain her facade. She was living inside a pristine craftsman home surrounded by mature elm trees. It was a property without a mortgage. She looked at my crown molding and saw a giant untapped bank account. She just needed a way to bypass the name on the deed. Her focus shifted from stealing credit to stealing real estate. She was preparing to cross the final boundary, stepping blindly into a trap she could never escape. Real estate represents the ultimate anchor in personal finance. A property without a mortgage is a fortress of unencumbered equity. Beverly was currently drowning in the hidden debt of her failed dietary supplement venture, and she looked at my craftsman home as a life raft. When her attempts to secure high-yield credit cards were thwarted by David's fictitious legal counsel, her desperation mutated into sheer audacity. She needed massive liquid capital. The Oak Park house possessed a market value north of $700,000. To a woman accustomed to extracting resources from her family, that equity was simply sitting there, waiting to be harvested. David relayed her new objective during a covert meeting at a botanical garden on the edge of the city. We walked through a humid greenhouse surrounded by exotic orchids and condensation-covered glass. He pulled up his collar against the damp air, his expression grim. He explained her pitch. She had sat him down in the living room the previous night, pouring 2 glasses of expensive Cabernet. She spun a beautiful, tragic narrative. She claimed the current residents harbored too many painful memories of his failed marriage. She proposed liquidating the asset and pooling their resources to purchase a sprawling, multi-generational estate in a wealthier suburb. She painted a picture of a fresh start, a grand family compound where she could properly care for him and Jessica. She demanded he contact a realtor immediately to list the property. David, maintaining his assigned role as the paralyzed, grieving son, agreed to look into the market values. He promised to start the paperwork. Beverly's grand vision contained a catastrophic structural flaw. She operated under the archaic assumption that a marriage automatically merged all physical assets. She believed David held a 50% stake in the property by default, and she assumed she could manipulate him into transferring his portion to her during the sale. She possessed no concept of premarital property laws in the state of Illinois. Her ignorance hit a brick wall 3 days later. Impatient with David's intentional stalling, Beverly took the initiative. She contacted a local real estate agent, a woman from her country club circle, to draft a preliminary market analysis. The agent pulled the municipal tax records to verify the plat map and the ownership details. The agent subsequently called Beverly with confusing news. The tax records reflected a single entity. The deed belonged exclusively to Camilla James. David possessed no legal authority to list, market, or sell the residence. A rational individual would abandon the scheme upon discovering they possessed zero legal claim to a $700,000 asset. Beverly was not rational. She was a narcissist, pushed to the edge of financial ruin. Her twisted pathology convinced her that because her son had slept under that roof, she inherently deserved the equity. I had wounded her pride by walking away. In her mind, confiscating my home was the appropriate compensation for her suffering. If she could not bypass the legal owner, she decided to replace the legal owner. She transitioned from toxic familial manipulation directly into the realm of federal criminal activity. She researched the municipal protocols for property transfers. She discovered the mechanics of a quitclaim deed. It is a legal instrument used to quickly transfer interest in real property from one party to another. It is commonly utilized during divorces or within families to add a relative to a title. It requires a notarized signature from the current owner, formally relinquishing their exclusive rights. Beverly downloaded a blank template from the county clerk website. She printed the document on thick ivory legal stock paper. She needed my authorization to execute the transfer. Assuming I was languishing in my dreary apartment, paralyzed by heartbreak and distracted by the impending divorce, she calculated the risk. She believed I would never monitor the municipal registries. She decided to forge my signature. She required a template to copy. David observed her rummaging through the filing cabinets in his grading study, digging out old holiday cards and expired utility bills that bore my handwriting. She spent an entire afternoon sitting at the dining room table, practicing the specific slant of my cursive, tracing the loops of my letters, until her imitation appeared flawless. A forged signature alone is insufficient to alter a property deed. The document mandates authentication by a licensed notary public. This hurdle often stops amateur fraudsters. Beverly outsourced this problem to her daughter. Jessica possessed an extensive network of equally unprincipled acquaintances. She located a former coworker whose notary commission was nearing expiration, a woman willing to apply her official stamp to a document without verifying the identity of the signatory, provided she received a generous cash incentive. They executed the fraudulent paperwork on a Tuesday. Beverly drove to the downtown recording office and submitted the heavy legal stock paper to the clerk, officially requesting the addition of her name to the Oak Park title. She believed she had just orchestrated the perfect heist. She assumed the bureaucracy would process the request, silently granting her the leverage to force a sale. She vastly underestimated my logistical infrastructure. Long before I ever married her son, I implemented a comprehensive security perimeter around my assets. The Cook County Recorder of Deeds offers an automated electronic property fraud alert system. Anytime a document is recorded against a registered property index number, the system instantly generates an email notification to the true owner. I was sitting in my sterile, linoleum-floored apartment reviewing overseas cargo manifests when my smartphone vibrated against the desk. The screen illuminated, displaying an urgent alert from the municipal registry. A new filing was pending against my residential address. I opened the email and downloaded the attached PDF scan of the submitted document. I stared at the high-resolution image, the thick ivory paper, the official ink-stamped notary seal, and resting at the bottom, scrawled in blue ink, was a near-perfect replica of my signature, transferring joint ownership of my home to Beverly James. The audacity was staggering. I picked up my burner device and dialed David. He answered from the quiet confines of his empty classroom. I instructed him to drive home immediately, bypass his mother, and enter my locked home office. I told him to access the commercial-grade fireproof safe bolted beneath the mahogany desk. I provided the biometric override code. I listened through the encrypted connection as he navigated the house. I heard the faint sound of Beverly humming in the kitchen downstairs, oblivious to her impending doom. I heard the heavy steel latch of the safe disengage with a loud, satisfying thud. David rummaged through the dark, climate-controlled interior. He located the sealed plastic sleeve resting at the very bottom. He pulled it out and examined the contents. "The original deed is still here," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "It is completely untouched. Your name is the only one on the paper." I exhaled a slow, measured breath. "Your mother just filed a forged quitclaim deed with the county clerk, David. She bribed a notary. She committed real estate fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. She crossed jurisdictional lines by transmitting the fraudulent requests through the municipal servers." The line went dead silent. The gravity of the situation crashed over him. She was no longer just a difficult mother. She was a felon. "What do we do?" he asked, the anxiety replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. "We let the county process the paperwork," I replied. We let her believe the trap worked. We gather the forensic accountant report, we secure the digital logs, we package the evidence. I instructed David to return the original deed to the safe and lock the heavy steel latch. The physical proof of my exclusive ownership remained protected. The fraudulent document circulating through the government servers was nothing more than a signed confession. Beverly had handed me the ultimate leverage, bound in blue ink and a corrupt notary stamp. She spent the next week floating on a cloud of unearned arrogance. She hired a landscaping crew to prune the elm trees, acting as the undisputed lady of the manor. She began packing my remaining boxed items stored in the basement, eager to erase the final remnants of my presence. She called her affluent friends, loudly boasting about the upcoming sale of the property and her brilliant financial maneuvering. She needed an audience to validate her triumph. She craved public recognition for her perceived victory over the cold, calculating woman who had stolen her boy. She required a stage large enough to display her new status. The perfect opportunity was rapidly approaching. My cousin was hosting an extravagant wedding reception at an exclusive country club in Naperville. The entire extended family was scheduled to attend. Beverly purchased a champagne silk dress specifically for the occasion, intending to hold court among the relatives eager to broadcast the narrative of my ultimate defeat. She walked toward that country club ballroom believing she held the deed to my kingdom. She had no idea she was stepping onto a scaffold I had spent 4 months meticulously constructing. The calendar finally aligned to bring the operation to its absolute conclusion. The timeline catches up to the present day. It was the afternoon of my cousin's early spring wedding. Exactly 4 months had passed since the Thanksgiving dinner that fractured the surface of my life. The venue was a high-end country club in Naperville. I handed my keys to the valet and bypassed the coat check. I did not wear a pastel chiffon gown or a floral wrap. The extended family expected a defeated woman hiding in the shadows of a cheap apartment. I refused to grant them that visual. I arrived looking radiant and untouchable. I wore a tailored suit. The fabric was a dark midnight blue wool blend cut with architectural precision. The lapels were sharp. The trousers fell in a perfect, unbroken line over my leather heels. It was not wedding attire. It was corporate armor. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and entered the grand ballroom. The space was a logistical marvel of high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and expansive arched windows overlooking a manicured golf course. The acoustics were designed to carry sound effortlessly. Currently, the room amplified a specific Vivaldi track. The string quartet playing in the corner navigated the frantic, driving notes of the Winter Concerto. The staccato bowing of the violins layered a thin veneer of tension over the clinking of champagne flutes. My entrance did not go unnoticed. The extended family whispers started immediately. Aunts and uncles paused with their forks suspended in midair. The ambient chatter dipped into a sudden, noticeable lull. I felt their gazes tracking my movements across the polished hardwood floor. They observed my steady gait and my upright posture. I did not shrink from their stares. I met their eyes with a cool, level expression. The murmurs of aunts and uncles rippled through the crowd. They were attempting to process an anomaly. The woman they believed was mourning a ruined marriage was striding through the room with the unbothered confidence of an executive arriving for a hostile takeover. I scanned the environment, observing the logistics of the room. A supply chain analyst always identifies the nodes, the transit lines, and the bottlenecks. The bar in the far corner served as the primary bottleneck, gathering a dense crowd of thirsty guests. The exits were clearly marked and unobstructed. I identified the optimal location to initiate the final phase. Across the room, standing near a towering, melting swan ice sculpture, Beverly and Jessica were holding court. The room temperature was slightly elevated, causing the intricate details of the carved ice to soften. A steady, rhythmic drip of water fell from the swan's beak into the silver catch basin below. The sound was a quiet metronome, ticking away the final moments of their false reality. Beverly wore her champagne silk dress. It was a garment chosen specifically to absorb the spotlight. She stood in the center of a dense circle of relatives holding a crystal flute. Jessica flanked her right side, acting as a loyal lieutenant, sipping a vibrant pink cocktail. They were the focal point of the gathering. They were the center of attention. I did not approach immediately. I utilized the natural camouflage of a floral arrangement near a structural pillar. I remained still, observing their operation. Beverly was projecting her voice, ensuring the surrounding circle absorbed every detail of her fabricated triumph. She was loudly bragging to aunts and uncles that David was finalizing his divorce. She spoke with profound, practiced empathy. She detailed how difficult the past 4 months had been for her poor son. She claimed he was finally healing, finally stepping out from beneath my oppressive shadow. She took a slow sip of her beverage and dropped her ultimate prize into the conversation. She announced they were buying a new house for the Real family. She claimed the Oak Park residence would hit the real estate market within the week. She painted a vivid, luxurious picture of a sprawling estate in a wealthier zip code, complete with a dedicated guest house for Jessica. The relatives nodded, offering sympathetic smiles and words of encouragement. They bought the narrative wholesale. They accepted the defective inventory without checking the manifest. I stood by the pillar, listening to the scale of her delusion. Every word she spoke was another document added to the prosecution's file. She firmly believed she had outmaneuvered me. She believed the forged quitclaim deed was quietly processing through the municipal bureaucracy, granting her unchecked access to my equity. She believed David was entirely under her control. She was oblivious to the reality unfolding just beyond the country club walls. She did not know David was currently sitting in the driver's seat of his sedan in the valet parking lot. She did not know he held a prepaid burner device in his hand, waiting for my specific text message to enter the building. I remained in the shadows, calculating the exact moment to strike. Timing is the most critical component of any logistical operation. If I interrupted her too early, she would simply dismiss me as a jealous, bitter ex-wife, causing a scene. I needed her to reach the absolute zenith of her hubris. I needed her to construct a pedestal so high that the resulting fall would shatter her credibility beyond repair. The convergence of the antagonists, the protagonist, and the audience was complete. The family was gathered. The stage was set. The tension from the opening hook was reestablishing itself in the heavy air of the ballroom. Beverly laughed at a joke made by an uncle. The sound was bright, triumphant, and entirely hollow. She reached out and patted Jessica on the arm, a gesture of absolute maternal victory. The ice swan dripped another bead of water into the silver basin. The string quartet shifted into a lower, more deliberate tempo. The variables aligned. The moment arrived. I stepped away from the floral pillar. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue jacket. I adjusted the strap of the sleek leather tote bag resting on my shoulder. Inside that bag sat a thick black presentation folder containing the certified forensic accounting report, the digital IP logs, and the documented evidence of federal wire fraud. I began my approach. I moved with slow, measured steps, my leather heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The crowd of guests naturally parted before me, creating a direct physical pathway toward the melting ice sculpture. The whispers flared up again, louder this time. The aunts and uncles in Beverly's immediate circle noticed the shift in the room's energy. They turned their heads, their expressions faltering as they saw me advancing on their position. Jessica noticed me first. Her grip tightened on her cocktail glass. Her eyes widened, a flash of genuine panic breaking through her rehearsed composure. She leaned toward her mother, whispering an urgent warning. Beverly slowly turned around. The bright, triumphant laugh died in her throat. She saw me standing 10 feet away, radiating cold, professional authority. The champagne dress suddenly looked flimsy against the architectural structure of my tailored suit. The trap was primed. The final audit was about to begin. The physical space between us seemed to contract, pulling the attention of the surrounding relatives into a tight, breathless vacuum. Beverly recovered from her initial shock within a fraction of a second. The instinct to dominate overrode any latent sense of caution. She did not retreat. She stepped forward, leaving the melting ice sculpture behind, and closed the distance. Jessica followed half a step behind, her knuckles white where she gripped the stem of her cocktail glass. A distinct, rapid tremor shook the liquid in her cup, a physical manifestation of the anxiety her mother lacked the awareness to feel. Beverly planted her feet. She tilted her chin upward, assuming the posture of a monarch addressing a banished subject. The champagne silk of her dress shimmered under the chandeliers. She deployed the tight, practiced smile she reserved for public victories. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Camila," she said. Her voice was pitched at that precise country club frequency designed to carry just far enough to reach the ears of the gossiping aunts and uncles. "Though I suppose you always did lack shame." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I absorbed the hostility with the same detached focus I use when reviewing a flawed shipping manifest. I squared my shoulders, feeling the structured wool of my jacket settle perfectly into place. "I told David it would take time to heal," she continued, projecting her narrative to the audience. She gestured vaguely with her cocktail napkin, a dismissive flick of her wrist. "But driving you out of my son's house 4 months ago was the best decision I ever made. I saved him from a lifetime of being managed by a cold ledger of a woman. He is finally free." The relatives surrounding us remained utterly silent. They watched the confrontation unfold, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her public declaration. Beverly soaked in their attention. She thrived on the spectacle. She believed she was delivering the final, fatal blow to my reputation. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper, ensuring the closest family members caught every word. "We are listing the Oak Park house next week. David agreed it holds too many bitter memories. We are purchasing a beautiful estate in Hinsdale, a true family compound, a place where he can finally relax without someone auditing his every move. It is a shame you will not be there to see it." I let the silence stretch for 3 deliberate seconds. I allowed her to fully commit to her fabricated reality. I watched her bask in the smug satisfaction of her perceived triumph. The Vivaldi concerto played on the frantic violins, contrasting sharply with the cold, still air between us. I reached into my tailored pocket and retrieved my smartphone. I tapped the screen once, sending a pre-programmed single-character text message to the burner device waiting in the valet parking lot. The signal was sent. The final piece of the logistics network was in motion. I lowered the phone and met her gaze. "Is that what you believe, Beverly?" The question hung in the air, quiet and devastating. It lacked any trace of defensive anger. It was an inquiry devoid of emotional variance. It was the tone of a professional auditor asking a fraudulent vendor to verify a forged invoice. Beverly scoffed a short, abrasive sound. She rolled her eyes, dismissing my composure as a pathetic attempt to save face. "It is not a belief, Camila. It is the truth. My son chose his family. He chose his mother. You thought your little spreadsheets could control us, but blood is thicker than your bank accounts. You have nothing left here." I maintained my level stare. A fundamental rule of supply chain management is verifying the origin of the materials. If the raw data is corrupt, the entire production line fails. "Did you verify your raw data, Beverly?" She frowned, the confident smile faltering slightly at the edges. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the deed to the Oak Park residence I stated." My voice remained steady, cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. "When you decided to list the property, did you ever bother to check whose name was actually on the paper? Did you check the supply chain of your own lies?" The color drained from Jessica's face. The tremor in her hand amplified, splashing a drop of pink liquid over the rim of her glass onto the polished floor. She recognized the specific clinical tone of my voice. She remembered the corporate security logs. She knew what happened when I asked questions I already possessed the answers to. Beverly, however, remained completely oblivious to the trap. Her arrogance provided a thick layer of insulation against reality. She let out another harsh laugh. "Please, you cannot intimidate me with your corporate jargon. David is selling the house. The paperwork is already in motion. You cannot stop it." "The paperwork you submitted on Tuesday afternoon," I clarified. "The thick ivory legal stock paper you presented to the Cook County Recorder of Deeds." The silence in the immediate vicinity deepened. The aunts and uncles exchanged confused, alarmed glances. The conversation had shifted from vague, bitter insults to highly specific legal terminology. They sensed the ground shifting beneath Beverly's feet, even if she remained ignorant of the earthquake. Beverly's posture stiffened. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her eyes, quickly suppressed by a surge of defensive rage. "I do not have to explain my family's financial decisions to you. You are no longer part of this family." I tilted my head slightly, observing the frantic calculations occurring behind her eyes. "You submitted a quitclaim deed to add your name to the title," I continued, my voice unyielding. "You assumed my absence from the physical property equated to an absence of oversight. You assumed the legal owner was too distracted to monitor the municipal registries." "You do not know what you are talking about," Beverly snapped. Her voice lost the polished country club frequency. It climbed higher, sharp, and desperate. "You are lying. You are just trying to cause a scene because you are jealous. A professional does not cause a scene. A professional delivers the audit report. You bypassed the legal owner." I stated the words falling like heavy stones into the quiet room. "You forged my signature. You paid your daughter's former co-worker to apply a corrupt notary stamp. You transmitted a fraudulent legal instrument through a government server." The gasp that rippled through the gathered relatives was audible. The murmurs erupted into shocked, frantic whispering. The word "forged" hung in the air, a bright, undeniable beacon of criminal intent. Jessica took a step backward, physically distancing herself from her mother. Her eyes darted toward the exits. The loyal lieutenant realized the ship was rapidly taking on water. Beverly's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. The veins in her neck strained against the collar of her champagne dress. "How dare you," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "How dare you accuse me of such things in front of my family? You have no proof. You have nothing. You are a bitter, lonely woman who lost her husband because she could not learn her place. David will tell everyone you are insane. David will confirm everything." She clung to her son as her final shield. She believed the months of emotional manipulation had cemented his loyalty. She believed he would walk into the room, stand by her side, and validate her delusions. She believed her control was absolute. She failed to realize that the man she thought she owned had been operating as an embedded agent for the past 120 days. I did not respond to her frantic accusations. I simply shifted my gaze past her shoulder, looking toward the main entrance of the grand ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors were currently closed, but the timing was precise. The logistics were flawless. The cargo had arrived. "You are about to find out exactly what David will confirm," I said. The Vivaldi concerto reached a sudden, dramatic crescendo, the violins soaring to a frantic peak. The sound echoed through the high ceilings, filling the space with a palpable, driving energy. Beverly turned her head, following my line of sight toward the entrance. The aunts and uncles turned as well. The entire room focused on the closed wooden doors. The final clash of ideologies was complete. The antagonist had maximized her public exposure. She had built her pedestal in the center of the room, surrounded by witnesses declaring her absolute victory. She had leaned entirely into her hubris, leaving no avenue for retreat. The trap was fully sprung. The only remaining action was the drop. The heavy mahogany doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open. They did not creak. The hinges were meticulously maintained, allowing the thick wood to glide silently apart. The sudden influx of air from the hallway caused the flames on the nearby candelabras to flicker. A collective intake of breath swept through the gathered relatives. David stepped over the threshold. He did not look like the defeated, grieving man his mother had been describing for 4 months. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, wearing a dark charcoal suit that mirrored the structured precision of my own attire. The chronic anxious slouch that usually defined his posture when his family was present had vanished. He walked with purpose, his gaze fixed straight ahead, navigating the polished hardwood floor with a steady, unhurried cadence. Beverly's initial reaction was a surge of profound relief. She saw her son, her ultimate asset, arriving exactly when she needed him to validate her narrative. The deep crimson flush of anger on her neck began to recede, replaced by a radiant, triumphant smile. She physically turned away from me, pivoting her body to face him. She extended her arms, ready to embrace the shield she believed she controlled. "David, darling," she called out, her voice regaining that polished, artificial sweetness. "I am so glad you are here. Camila was just saying the most absurd things. She is trying to ruin your cousin's special day. Come tell everyone the truth." David continued his approach. He passed the bar. He bypassed the gift table. He walked directly toward the melting ice swan. Beverly stepped forward to intercept him, her arms still open. She anticipated the obedient son who would lower his head and accept her version of reality to avoid a confrontation. He did not lower his head. He did not slow his pace. David walked right past her. He did not flinch. He did not make eye contact. He moved past his mother as if she were merely another piece of country club furniture, an obstacle to be stepped around. The physical rejection was absolute. Beverly's arms hung suspended in the air. The triumphant smile froze on her face, turning brittle and confused. She spun around, her champagne silk dress rustling sharply, watching him bypass her position. David stopped directly in front of me. The tension in the room, already stretched taut, seemed to snap. He reached out and took my right hand. His grip was firm, warm, and resolute. He leaned forward and kissed my cheek. It was not a hurried, nervous gesture. It was a deliberate, public claiming of his partner. The silence that fell over the ballroom was total. The Vivaldi concerto seemed to fade into the background, overpowered by the sheer weight of the unspoken revelation. A nearby aunt, paralyzed by the sudden inversion of the family dynamic, lost her grip on her silverware. A silver salad fork clattered loudly against a china plate, the sharp, metallic sound echoing through the quiet room. No one moved to retrieve it. Beverly stared at our interlocked hands. Her mind, rigid and accustomed to dictating the terms of reality, struggled to process the visual data. The scaffolding she had built over the last 120 days was collapsing in real time. "David, what are you doing?" she stammered. Her voice sounded thin, stripped of its usual authority. "Why are you holding her hand?" David finally turned his head to look at her. The expression he wore was one I had seen during our covert meetings in the concrete parking garages, but his mother had never witnessed it. It was the look of a man who had audited his own life and found the source of the deficit. "I am holding my wife's hand, Mother," he stated. His voice was calm, projecting easily across the quiet space. "She left you," Beverly insisted, her tone rising in a desperate attempt to maintain control. "She walked out on Thanksgiving. You told me yourself. You said she abandoned the marriage." David let out a short, humorless exhale. "I told you what you needed to hear." He released my hand and took a half step toward her. He extended his right arm, opening his palm face up. "I need the key," he said. Beverly blinked, disoriented. "The key? What key?" "The spare key to our house," he clarified his tone, leaving no room for negotiation. "The brass quickset with the chipped blue plastic rim, the one you manipulated Jessica into giving you 2 years ago, the one you used to invade my home, throw away my wife's belongings, and establish a beachhead in our private space. Hand it over." Jessica, standing a few feet away, whimpered softly. The mention of her complicity in the initial boundary violation shattered whatever remaining nerve she possessed. She shrank back against the floral pillar, wishing she could disappear. Beverly's chest heaved. She looked at David's extended hand, then up at his resolute face. "You cannot do this," she hissed, the panic finally breaking through. "I am your mother. I sacrificed everything for you. You are confused. She is manipulating you." "She did not drive me away, Mom," David replied, his voice dropping to a low, devastating register. "She just gave you enough rope to tie your own knot." The color vanished from Beverly's face. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pale, sickly white that clashed with her champagne dress. The metaphorical rope had snapped tight. She realized the scope of the deception. The grieving son was an act. The separation was a manufactured environment designed to test her integrity, and she had failed the test completely. She had not merely failed by continuing her passive-aggressive behavior. She had failed by attempting to steal credit by siphoning funds to cover her embarrassing multi-level marketing debts, and ultimately by forging a signature on a federal real estate document. She had believed she was playing a grand game of chess against a cold, calculating woman. She realized too late that she had been playing against a unified front. "Give me the key," David repeated, his hands still outstretched. Beverly's hands trembled. The illusion of her dominance was shattered, leaving only the terrified reality of a woman caught in her own snare. She fumbled with the clasp of her designer clutch. She dug past her lipstick and her compact, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. She located her heavy keychain. She did not hand the entire ring to him. She struggled to detach the specific piece of metal. Her manicured nails slipped against the metal rings. The silence in the room stretched, amplifying the pathetic, metallic clinking of her frantic efforts. Finally, the brass item slid free. She held it out to her hand, shaking so violently that the chipped blue plastic rim vibrated. David did not take it from her. He stepped back, gesturing toward me. "You return it to the rightful owner," he instructed. Beverly turned slowly, facing me. The smug satisfaction that had defined her entrance was entirely gone. Her eyes were wide, filled with a frantic, desperate fear. She extended her trembling hand. I held out my palm. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply accepted the return of my property. The brass key dropped into my palm. It felt cold against my skin. I closed my fingers around it, securing the perimeter. The physical boundary had been reclaimed. But the physical boundary was only the initial violation. The audit was not yet complete. I had reclaimed the key, but the financial ledger remained unbalanced. Beverly still believed she could retreat, perhaps apologize, and negotiate a surrender. She believed she could leverage her status as a mother to avoid the consequences of her actions. She did not understand that a forensic accountant does not accept apologies. A forensic accountant requires restitution. I slipped the brass key into the pocket of my tailored suit. Then I reached into the sleek leather tote bag resting on my shoulder. It was time to present the final report. It was time to show the assembled family exactly what it cost to keep the peace. The brass metal grew warm against my palm as I slid my hand deep into the pocket of my tailored trousers. The physical retrieval of my property marked merely the opening phase of the audit. I unlatched the hidden magnetic clasp securing my leather tote bag. Reaching inside, my fingers brushed against a thick, matte black presentation folder. This specific object represented the final tangible evolution of my meticulous spreadsheets. The color-coded rows and digital transit columns had materialized into bound, certified forensic evidence. I gripped the rigid spine and pulled the dossier free. Situated to my right sat a circular, high-top cocktail table, its surface constructed of pristine, tempered glass. I shifted my stance, closing the short distance. I held the dark folder a few inches above the transparent surface and let it fall. The impact produced a crisp, sharp slap. The sound cracked like a wooden gavel striking a block, echoing sharply across the stagnant air of the ballroom. The string quartet in the corner ceased playing mid-measure. The musicians sat frozen in their chairs, their bows resting motionless across their knees, unwilling to generate any noise that might interrupt the proceedings. When a novice seeks dominance in a boardroom, they raise their voice. They rely on volume to compensate for a lack of foundational substance. A seasoned analyst understands the inverse ratio of power. To truly command an audience, you drop your decibel level. You force the listeners to lean forward. You make them hold their breath to catch your syllables. I kept my posture relaxed. I rested my fingertips lightly on the dark, textured cover of the dossier. "Let us review the ledger," I stated. My voice remained smooth, conversational, and devoid of defensive heat. I flipped open the heavy cover. The first page displayed a notarized summary drafted by Sarah, my retained financial investigator. I directed my gaze straight into Beverly's wide, panicked eyes. 3 months ago, you diverted $1,800 from David's primary checking account under the guise of an urgent, unpaid medical crisis. The actual destination routing numbers for those funds pointed directly to a wholesale distribution hub for Vitality Core Solutions. You and Jessica incurred a cumulative debt of $7,200 purchasing bulk dietary supplements you failed to sell. A collective low murmur rippled through the gathered aunts, uncles, and cousins. In the affluent circles Beverly so desperately tried to impress, falling victim to a pyramid scheme represented an unforgivable social failure. The shimmering champagne dress suddenly lost its calculated luster. She swallowed hard, her throat visibly working against a dry mouth. She darted her eyes around the immediate circle of relatives, witnessing their expressions curdle from sympathetic concern into quiet pity and distinct, uncomfortable embarrassment. Her curated image of affluent grace fractured under the weight of an exact, undeniable dollar amount. I turned the page. The rustle of the thick stock paper sounded abnormally loud in the quiet room. Unfortunately, burying your bruised pride proved more expensive than you anticipated. I continued. When the stolen cash proved insufficient to cover your minimum purchasing quotas, you attempted to open high-yield rewards cards, utilizing your son's personal credentials. You submitted the digital applications from the broadband router installed in my living room while occupying my house. I have the certified Internet Protocol logs matching your digital footprint down to the exact minute of submission. Jessica backed further away, her shoulder blades bumping hard against the floral pillar. The vibrant pink cocktail splashed over the rim of her glass, staining her wrist and spotting the polished floor. She understood the severe legal consequences of identity theft. Her mother remained rigid, her chest rising and falling in shallow, frantic bursts. The smug monarch who had held court just 10 minutes prior was rapidly deteriorating into a cornered suspect, searching for an exit that did not exist. I flipped to the third exhibit section. The heavy, ivory legal paper gleamed under the light of the crystal chandeliers. But fraudulent credit cards only offer temporary, unsecured relief, I maintained, keeping my cadence measured and relentless. You required substantial liquid capital. You looked at my property and decided to extract the equity. You drafted a quitclaim deed to add yourself to the title. You practiced forging my signature using old utility bills you scavenged from David's grading study. You bribed a notary public whose commission was nearing expiration to apply an official authentication stamp without verifying my identity. You walked into the Cook County Recorder of Deeds on Tuesday afternoon and submitted the fraudulent instrument. You assumed the legal owner was too broken to monitor the municipal registries. You assumed the bureaucracy would process the theft in silence. The surrounding relatives took a collective, synchronized step backward. The invisible circle around Beverly expanded, leaving her isolated on an island of her own creation. The attendees were no longer standing near a grieving mother seeking comfort. They were standing next to a profound liability. The murmurs ceased entirely, replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. Forgery and real estate fraud carry mandatory minimum sentences in the state of Illinois. Crossing jurisdictional lines to transmit those documents through municipal servers elevates the offense to federal wire fraud. Beverly opened her mouth. Her lips parted, but her vocal cords remained paralyzed. She had spent 25 years building a dense fortress of victimization, using the trauma of a bitter divorce to justify her parasitic behavior. She believed her maternal status granted her permanent immunity from accountability. She looked at the stark, undeniable evidence resting on the glass table. She looked at the faces of her siblings and peers, registering their profound disgust. She looked at her son, the boy she had tried to wield as a weapon, standing firmly by my side. "You built your entire identity on a single justification," I said. I stepped back from the high-top table, leaving the open dossier resting under the lights for anyone curious enough to read the precise forensic figures. You told me repeatedly over the last 2 years that a mother's access is never revoked. You used that excuse to bypass my locks, drain our shared accounts, and attempt to steal my home. You believed your title gave you the right to treat my life as your personal inventory. I held her gaze, watching the last remnants of her arrogance dissolve into pure, unadulterated fear. You are incorrect, Beverly. A mother's access is never revoked unless it is a crime scene, and you left undeniable fingerprints on every single page. The silence stretched out heavy and final. The audit was concluded. The evidence was presented, verified, and impossible to refute. There would be no tearful apologies, no shifting of blame, and no appeals to familial duty. The reality she had tried to fabricate had been dismantled piece by piece, leaving her exposed to the cold, harsh light of legal consequence. The audience waited, holding their collective breath, anticipating the final judgment. The logistics of her ruin were complete. The only remaining step was the execution of the penalty. The presentation of the forensic evidence left a profound void in the center of the ballroom. The gathered relatives remained entirely motionless, processing the stark reality of the documents resting on the tempered glass. The social architecture Beverly had spent decades constructing lay dismantled in a matter of minutes. She possessed no counter-argument. The data was terminal. David broke the stillness. He reached inside the breast pocket of his dark charcoal suit. He did not retrieve a handkerchief or a sentimental token. He withdrew a single crisp white envelope. The paper was stiff and formal, bearing the embossed letterhead of a prominent local law firm. He held the envelope by the corner, extending his arm across the small gap separating him from his mother. Beverly stared at the white paper. Her hands remained frozen at her sides. She lacked the capacity to accept another piece of documentation. "Take it," David instructed. His voice lacked any trace of the anxiety that used to govern his interactions with her. The tone was level, authoritative, and entirely detached. When she refused to move, he dropped the envelope onto the glass table, letting it rest directly on top of the black presentation folder. The white paper provided a stark visual contrast against the dark cover. "That is a formal, legally binding notice of eviction," David stated, addressing her with the clinical precision of a process server. "You are currently occupying a residence you do not own under false pretenses, while actively attempting to defraud the legal title holder. My attorney drafted that document yesterday. You have exactly 72 hours to pack your luggage, gather your unsellable inventory, and vacate the premises in Oak Park. If you remain inside the property at the expiration of that window, the local authorities will arrive to execute a forced removal." Beverly let out a ragged, shallow breath. Her eyes darted from the envelope to her son. "You are throwing your own mother out onto the street?" "I am removing a liability from my household," he corrected. "You threw yourself out the moment you decided my wife was an obstacle you needed to eliminate. You treated my marriage as a temporary inconvenience. You treated my trust as a resource to be exploited." He shifted his gaze toward his sister. Jessica shrank further against the floral pillar, wishing the decorative vines could swallow her whole. "Jessica," he said, his voice dropping into a register of profound disappointment, "you enabled every single violation. You provided the spare key. You planted the fabricated note in the vehicle. You procured the corrupt notary. You allowed her to drag you into federal wire fraud just to avoid getting a legitimate job. You are an adult. It is time you face the consequences of your own logistics." David turned his attention back to his mother. The final thread tethering him to his past was about to be severed. "Do not contact my phone," he told her. "Do not attempt to visit my classroom. Do not send mail to our residential address. Any future communication regarding your departure or the recovery of your belongings will be routed exclusively through my legal counsel. We are finished." He did not wait for a response. He did not linger to watch the tears form in her eyes or listen to the inevitable, desperate pleas for forgiveness. He turned his back on the woman who had spent his entire life demanding his obedience. He offered me his arm. I rested my hand on his sleeve. We turned together and walked away from the high-top table. We navigated the polished hardwood floor, retracing our path through the crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins. The guests parted seamlessly, granting us a wide berth. No one offered a word of protest. No one stepped forward to defend the woman weeping near the melting ice sculpture. The extended family simply watched us exit silently, absorbing the undeniable shift in authority. We pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into the cool, crisp air of the early spring evening. The valet retrieved our sedan. We drove away from the country club, leaving the Vivaldi concerto and the shattered illusions far behind us. The drive back to Oak Park occurred in a comfortable, resonant quiet. The covert operations were terminated. The encrypted burner phones and the secret rendezvous in municipal parking garages were no longer required. The ledger was balanced. The ensuing 72 hours unfolded with strict legal efficiency. We did not return to the Craftsman house immediately. We remained in my temporary downtown apartment, utilizing the exterior security cameras to monitor the eviction protocol. Beverly and Jessica did not hire professional movers. They lacked the liquid capital required for premium services. Their credit profiles were frozen, and the looming debt from the dietary supplement scheme had drained their remaining reserves. Instead, they rented a battered yellow box truck. We watched the high-definition video feed as they hauled their oversized suitcases and heavy cardboard boxes out the front door. Their movements were sluggish, devoid of the arrogant energy that characterized their arrival. They loaded the unsold inventory of useless vitamins into the back of the rented vehicle. By the end of the third day, the silver crossover SUV and the yellow box truck pulled out of the driveway, disappearing down the tree-lined street. The destination of that box truck provided the ultimate poetic conclusion to their campaign of hostility. Bankrupt, disgraced, and facing severe legal inquiries regarding the forged real estate documents, Beverly could no longer afford the affluent lifestyle she desperately craved. The country club suspended her membership due to unpaid dues. The gossiping network of friends discarded her, eager to distance themselves from a public scandal. With limited options and no access to my financial resources, Beverly and Jessica were forced to secure affordable housing. They signed a lease in the exact same sprawling gray concrete complex near the industrial corridor where I had staged my strategic withdrawal. They hauled their luggage across the cracked linoleum flooring. They spent their evenings listening to the uneven hiss of the radiators and the relentless roar of the nearby highway. They moved into the dreary utilitarian box they had spent 4 months mocking me for inhabiting. The environment they deemed a fitting punishment for a cold careerist became their permanent reality. Following their departure, David and I returned to our property. The first order of business involved securing the physical perimeter. I hired a specialized contractor to replace every exterior entryway. The traditional brass deadbolts were removed. In their place, the technician installed heavy-duty, commercial-grade biometric security systems. I stood on the front porch the following morning, testing the new hardware. I pressed my thumb against the sleek, dark glass of the reader. The mechanism verified the data instantly. A sharp electronic chirp signaled the approval, followed by the solid mechanical click of the heavy steel bolt retracting. It was a precise, undeniable sound of security. I pushed the door open and walked through the foyer, heading toward the back of the house. The interior air felt clean, stripped of the heavy floral perfume and the oppressive scent of roasted meat. The windows were open, allowing the fresh spring breeze to circulate through the rooms. I stepped out onto the back patio. The morning sun cast long golden rays across the damp grass. David sat at the wrought iron table reading a hardcover historical biography. He looked up as I approached. His face relaxed, the chronic tension lines around his eyes finally smoothing out. He slid a ceramic mug across the table toward my empty chair. I sat down and wrapped my hands around the warm clay. Thick white steam rose from the dark roast coffee curling lazily into the quiet morning air. The neighborhood was perfectly still. No unsolicited phone calls interrupted the morning. No uninvited guests possessed the capacity to bypass our locks. The environment was optimized. The variables were isolated and controlled. Many people operate under the dangerous misconception that true peace requires endless compromise. They believe harmony is achieved by absorbing the friction caused by unreasonable demands. They sacrifice their own resources, hoping the parasite will eventually consume enough to be satisfied. A seasoned analyst knows this approach guarantees a systemic collapse. True peace is never found by keeping the peace. True peace requires a rigorous, uncompromising audit of the people who demand access to your life. It requires the discipline to inspect the manifest, the courage to identify the corrupted cargo, and the absolute resolve to sever the supply chain when a vendor proves hostile. We secured our perimeter, we audited the threat, and we kept our home exactly where it belonged.